So hello everyone, and welcome to Tricycle's online practice session. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm very pleased to introduce as our guest teacher today, Roshi Joan Halifax. Roshi is a Zen priest, anthropologist, social activist, and pioneer in the field of end-of-life care. She's the founder and head teacher of Upaya Institute and Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Roshi, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll share a few notes about our call. We're on a Zoom webinar, so participant audio and video are off. We are recording the session right now for anyone unable to attend live. You can view the recordings as well as the schedule for our upcoming sessions at tricycle.org/live. And we are offering these sessions for free, so we appreciate any donations you're able to give to help us continue providing these opportunities for everyone to connect with wonderful teachers like Roshi Joan during these challenging times. So if you're interested in doing so, you can visit tricycle.org/donate. So on our call today, we'll have time for Roshi to share a few words about the situation we're in now, as well as a guided practice period. And then at the end of the call, we'll have time for some Q&A. So you can post your questions in the Q&A panel, which is at the button below the video screen. It says Q&A. And if you're tuning in today from Facebook Live, then you can post a question in the comment field and we'll add it to the list. So we'll get to as many questions as we can toward the end of the call today, and we'll be on for about an hour. So thank you again, Roshi, for being here with us. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. I was born into a Christian family, and so, Easter is a time of the year that's very familiar to me, and actually an important time of the year because for those of us who have a Christian heritage, the time of Easter points toward hope, toward rebirth, toward resurrection. And I feel in a certain way, whether it's the plagues that were sent to protect the Jews so they could be liberated from Egypt, or the crucifixion of Christ, that this season is a season that brings suffering and liberation together. I remember Zalman Schachter once said about Judas that without Judas, there would be no resurrection. It's a pretty radical way to think about resurrection. So the theme of suffering, of dying, death, rebirth is very much a part of the spring season, because underneath the soil there is shivering life waiting. And I'm not so sure how much longer we will be in this unprecedented situation, where the invisible is forcing visible, and in some cases, important changes in our social landscape and in our psychological landscape. But I do know that even for those who do not have the opportunity to shelter adequately, who have experienced loss, those who are caring for the sick and those who grieve. This is a time when practice is really important, that our capacity to have a strong back and an open front, a soft front, is really important, that we have the inner resources to be able to give and also to be able to face the truth of suffering. So I wanted to offer two poems, one at the beginning and one at the end of our session, that seem relevant, seem important, at a time that is both sacred and also broken. And this is a poem by Marie Howe, It's called Easter. 2 of the fingers on his right hand had been broken. So when he poured back into that hand, it surprised him. It hurt him at first. And the whole body was too small. Imagine the sky trying to fit into a tunnel carved into a hill. He came into it in 2 ways. From the outside, as we step into a pair of pants. And from the center, suddenly, all at once. Then he felt himself awake, in the dark, alone. Easter by Marie Howe. I'd like to invite us for a few minutes to take some time to get grounded and to also cultivate an awakened heart. And on your inhale, let your attention rest in the physical sensation of the inhale, of that in-breath. And on the exhale, drop into the body. And again, on the inhale, really gathering your attention, letting it be with the physical sensation of the in-breath, letting go of external distractions or even busyness in the mind. And the exhale, relax. If comfortable, drop into the body. And for a few moments, recall your intention. We're here together as this big virtual community at a time when many of us are sheltering alone or have been sheltering for many weeks, and who knows what is ahead of us. Many of us probably, as many of my students are doing, they're on, and you're on the front lines as caregivers. Doctors and nurses, chaplains, family members. So vulnerable. And offering your care and presence, even though you can't control the circumstances that we find ourselves in. What is it to show up? To have the resources to really show up. So touching into your intention, to your altruistic motivation. You know, doing this practice not just to benefit yourself, but also whatever awakening, whatever insight that you have, may it benefit others. And bringing to mind, extending this sensibility by recalling or connecting with some person or a situation where suffering is present. where you feel a real connection. You know, it could be like for me, some of my students are working in hospitals that are filled with patients who are so vulnerable, and they themselves are vulnerable. I want to bring one of those students to mind, a chaplain. Every day in the charnel ground she is. For you, it might be someone else, some other situation. And on your inhale, breathe in the truth of that person's situation as much as you can apprehend it. Or that situation that is connected to you. Person, place, pet, where suffering's really present. And on the exhale, send mercy, well-being. Let your natural kindness flow forth from an undefended heart. And again, on your inhale, be with the truth of suffering. And it's particular for you. That changes the landscape of your internal experience. Let yourself be touched, moved, not overwhelmed, but create the conditions, nourish the conditions where concern and kindness and compassion where these qualities of our heart, mind naturally come forth. And on the exhale, send great love, kindness, compassion. And as you do this, also be aware of what your physical experience is. It's changing moment to moment. But perhaps altruism changes the tone in the body. And notice what feelings are present, what emotions are present, and thoughts. Have some sense of your subjectivity and allow your subjectivity to open, to include the conditions that we find ourselves in and the conditions that others might be experiencing now. And let the breath be deep in the body, if that's comfortable for you. And letting this unselfish, this altruistic, this compassionate motivation, this great kindness move into the background of your awareness. And allow your attention to rest with the breath, the inhale or the exhale, or with words that are anchoring for you. May I find the inner resources, for example, to truly be able to give. May I find the inner resources to truly be able to give. Or may I offer love, knowing I cannot control the course of life, suffering, or death. May I offer love, knowing I cannot control the course of life, suffering, or death. Or may I see my own limits with compassion, just as I view the suffering of others. May I see my own limits with compassion, just as I view the suffering of others. And let the breath be deep in the body, if that's comfortable for you. And completing the practice, always dedicating whatever good that has arisen for you from these moments of practice together to the benefit of others. So maybe reflect on the person that you brought to mind as you were cultivating a compassionate motivation. Or maybe to all caregivers, may the merit of this practice nourish you, directly or indirectly. So thank you. So thank you for sitting with me these 15 minutes or so. I really appreciate that. It's yeah, it helps my heart. I think one of the things that is very present for me right now is the moral suffering that caregivers, whether it's professional caregivers or family caregivers, the moral suffering that so many are facing today in relation to this virulent and catastrophic respiratory illness. Just reading about the elderly woman who said to the physicians who were taking care of her, here, give my vet to someone else, to a younger person. A reading about the elderly couple married for 51 years who died 6 minutes apart of the coronavirus, and holding hands. Hearing about the futility and challenge that doctors and nurses and health aides are experiencing in Italy, in Spain, in New York. And also the extraordinary heart and courage of so many in these circumstances, which would crush many. But we know that often, as Rebecca Solnit has written in her book, there's hope in the dark. There's the capacities of courage and humility, of kindness, of leaving behind one's petty concerns and experiencing the benefits of unfiltered compassion. And we know also from such interesting research in neuroscience and social psychology that not manifesting compassion in these circumstances leads one to feel morally compromised. And witnessing compassion or being compassionate is morally elevating. And yet, in these circumstances, family members and clinicians are facing existential decisions that could lead to grave moral suffering. And so what is really important, among many things right now, I feel, is that we do the practical, which is George Crucis, the endocrinologist, has written extensively about this, the importance of sleep, of good diet, of exercise, but also the importance of relationship. We know now from the work in endocrinology and social psychology that relationship is an immune enhancer. A healthy relationship is an immune enhancer, that we need each other. And that for many people who are sheltering alone, this is a time of great trial. And it's also an opportunity through these platforms that we're working with now, through Zoom and Skype and all these platforms, that we have a fascinating opportunity to connect in a way across time and across space in a way that we have never known before. And we're also facing such deep uncertainty. And that uncertainty, I feel, it brings me back to what my teacher, Glassman Roshi, he talked about the value of not knowing. Not knowing is most intimate, is a line from a koan. So in the midst of this tango, which is a mystery, is a kind of sacred time, is also a kind of a rite of passage that we are in as a global community, practice is so important. The strong back, the soft front, resting in the support of the precepts, coming to terms with the truth of impermanence, understanding that there is no inherent self, that there is radical connectivity, And it is a time where we're asked to resource ourselves so that we can not only meet, but craft a future which is not only sane, but also kind. So I think it would be good for us to open up to questions now, if you wish. Is that an okay thing, or do we want to do another little practice? Tell me.
I'm happy either way, but we do have some wonderful questions here, so we could.
Well, let's do the questions.
Great. All right, let's start with this one. Lately, I feel disconnected from my heart. Would you have any recommendations or techniques to reconnect and be centered in our heart center?
Mm-hmm. So sometimes it was interesting, that question. This is such a great question. Actually, I was in an interview, doing interviews this morning as part of our spring practice period, which is online, with the head of the nursing department and social work department at a big university hospital. And she asked a similar question. And I said, sometimes when we're alienated, when we're cut off from our heart, it's a kind of invitation for us to step back and to resource ourselves, if just for a minute. For example, Jonathan Bartels, who's a nurse at UVA, developed something called the pause, which is after a patient has died, instead of the team just scattering in all the directions, the team comes together and pauses, stops. And stopping can take many different forms. But often when we feel dry or cut off, it's an invitation for us to pause, to stop. We shouldn't feel bad about it. It's natural. It's our own internal way of saying, okay, it's time for a deep exhale. So that's one possibility, one way we can look at this. Another is to recognize that we're in a time where so much uncertainty is present. And we're also unable to control things. And many people are frightened, lonely, sick, angry, and feel a lack of autonomy, a lack of agency. And we can look at our own situation, and as Maizumi Roshi said, we can appreciate whatever we have and vow to use the gifts of our life, whatever it might be, even just being with each other now at this moment, to resource ourselves. And particularly considering that there are so many who do not have the resources that we have. Another is to cultivate bodhicitta, which we did at the beginning of meditation, which is to bring someone to mind whom we feel connected to, whom we really care about. For example, the chaplain I was resting with as I was cultivating this sense of deep love and care and concern, and changing the biochemical landscape that's informing our current experience so that our own goodness can come forth. So those are just a few thoughts. I hope they're helpful. But please be patient with yourself. I think all of us are having moments that are pretty odd.
Thank you. Kathy asks, what advice would you give to healthcare workers who are with the dying now when family members cannot be physically present?
This is now such an unfortunate situation that healthcare providers are facing literally all over the world. So there are the practical things, which is to have an iPad there. But, you know, we are family for each other, no matter in what relationship we might be. If we have the opportunity to be a surrogate mother, a surrogate sister, a surrogate brother, a surrogate child to someone who's dying, sort of stepping into the place of close family members and being a bridge of love. I think it's really important. And not just working at the functional level, which so many clinicians are, you know, going for cure. But the balance of that is care. And I think that's really where the root of medicine and nursing is nourished, in the experience of connection and care. And so we have a kind of calling now as healthcare providers, whether chaplain or doctor or nurse, health aide, to be family, not only to a dying person, but also to their family, and also to co-clinicians, co-chaplains. We have to really be there for each other and often step into the role of mother, of grandmother heart, even if it's just for a moment.
Thank you for that. Roshi, what advice do you have for parents who may be struggling with patience and compassion for their children as we spend a lot of time with each other?
Well, I haven't had the good fortune of being a mother, so you know, this is not a question that I feel I can answer authentically, but I have been, in a way, a mother or grandmother to a lot of students, and I have lost patience, and it's not a good thing. The damage control afterwards is very labor intensive. So what I try to do in relation to my students is to see the truth of my students' suffering, or my friend's suffering, or for a parent, my child's suffering, my child acting out, my child not being able to play with his or her friends, being cooped up in the house, being forced into chores. It's a new world for many parents at this time. And I think it's a world that is asking us to reshape our relationship with our children. And to know that in many parts of the world, this is how people live with their kids. Not just their kids online, but they're with their children, like in the villages of the Himalayas, 24/7. And the kids are integrated in a loving and powerful way, very strong way, into the daily weave of the family. So I think this is a pretty interesting opportunity for us to see if there's another way for us to be in our family systems. But the other side of the equation is our impatience, and patience is a paramita. Our impatience is natural, it's normal. It's something that will come up for us, and for us to be excessively hard on ourselves at this time because we feel short with the circumstances that we're in is maybe compounding the problem. Self-forgiveness is really important. And what are we learning from not having patience? And what capacities, and each individual will have different capacities, want to be strengthened as a result of not having great patience. So we have to be patient with ourselves too.
So Shannon responds, "Thank you for answering my question. I can feel my heart softening as you speak." how may we best serve those who operate from anger and denial in the midst of this pandemic?
Yeah. Well, we're in an interesting situation where there's a sector of the global population, not just America, that is operating out of anger, and also a sector that overlaps with that sector, where denial is vividly present. And I have my own limits to work with here. I do feel moral outrage toward sectors of our government, toward certain media outlets and so forth. I do feel this combination in moral outrage of anger and disgust. But I know two things: that moral outrage that is chronic is going to deeply harm me and really be no good for anyone else. But a touch of moral outrage, just like, a small pill of it, somehow can give us the energy to respond to things that are unjust, that are unkind, that are inappropriate, that are not aligned with the best for all beings, whether it's humans or all species. So there's a kind of balance and insight that is really necessary, that we need to implement or actualize when we feel ourselves going into anger and disgust. It's to understand this is a sort of wake-up call, but it's not to have that call turn into a scream. It's to actually create the conditions internally within us to hold ourselves accountable and others accountable to doing the best for all beings. Yeah, a lot of anger out there. But I want to say one other thing about anger. I worked as a volunteer in the penitentiary of New Mexico on death row in maximum security for 6 years. And it was the angriest place I've ever been in. There might be angrier places, but that was one angry environment. And what I saw about that anger was that it came from a sense of helplessness. And that really helped me to understand that that state of mind is also suffering. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Roshi. That's very helpful. All right. Renata asks, how can we use this time to contemplate and practice stillness, but also remain active and energized in our communities to help people who are most vulnerable at this point?
We have an inhale and an exhale. And we have a right hand and a left hand. Most of us do. And it's to really understand that for us to engage in action in the world that is principled, grounded, insightful, hopefully compassionate, it requires a kind of clarity of attention and an understanding and touching into our motivation or intention that is deeply aligned with who we are in the sort of deepest sense of the word of who we really are. And this is why practice for me has been so important. I just feel like the kind of go, go, go in our culture. And again, this reflects on the conversation I had with my colleague this morning that was so edifying for me. She was saying, at this university hospital, it's just one thing after another, pound, 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 pound. And I was saying, there have to be exhales. You have to pause. It could be one physical exhale or washing of your hands, or before you step into a patient's room, or before you step into a team meeting, for you to drop in and to stabilize, to get your attention clarified, to remember why you're here, to attune to body, heart, and mind, and to open yourself to the circumstances in which you find yourself being asked to serve. Practice is really important. It instantiates these capacities within our nervous system. And if we're just simply in the reactive mode, it becomes a kind of ball of flames that dominates our life. And we don't see the truth of suffering clearly. And right now, it's essential that we not be, quotes, do-gooders, but that we help in a principled way, that our altruism is healthy and not pathological. So I, really encourage those of us who are engaged in social action, in service, in the medical setting, in human rights organizations, in politics, in schools, that we give ourselves the time to build these capacities. Compassion is a kind of blazing, ruthless capacity. It sees the truth of suffering. It's not in a fog. It's morally aligned. It's characterized by moral nerve and moral sensitivity. It's not sappy. It has clarity, high resolution, and insight woven into this capacity to attend to the suffering of others, to feel concern, and to have the insight to see what might really serve. And practice enhances those capacities.
Thank you. Do you have any guidance on how to comfort those who have lost someone due to this virus? Death at this time is exceptionally traumatic in that family and friends can't hold services or be with one another to provide comfort.
So one of the things that has become clearer and clearer to me over the years of sitting with dying people and those who grieve is that language does not usually suffice. That presence is the best, I believe, that you can give. That holding the space for whatever that person is going through, whether it's expressive or mute. That things like, this was God's will, or you'll get over this, or even I'm so sorry. Sometimes these words are just dry, but really touching into the truth that mortality is shared by all of us. The inevitability is there, and opening our heart to the one who has gone through loss and holding that person with presence, coming alongside with kindness, with openness, but not feeling as if we have to control that person's experience. Yeah. I think there's not only the individual grief that those who have lost patients or lost family members are experiencing now, but also there's a kind of collective grief that we're all being touched by. And there are no words for this. But being with each other in whatever way is possible, offering our presence to each other as we move through and this river of sorrow, then we will be taught, I believe, by the waters of sorrow. And my sense is that we will be, through this, many of us, deeply humanized.
So Cindy asks, do you have any advice for people that have experienced trauma in their lives and this now is triggering the fear and feelings of being unsafe, causing anxiety and numbness?
Thank you for that question. It's a really important question. I think close losses for all of us, also the unknown, the uncertainty that we're facing. Many people are triggered. And it is an opportunity, I believe, for us to also, from one point of view, to strengthen ourselves, recognizing that many of us are in a safe situation. And there's been a very interesting series of journal papers recently about the profound benefit of going through difficult situations that are traumatizing, but learning how to climb out of the pit of trauma. And that process includes the capacity to relate to others what we're going through, the opportunity to relate to others about what we're going through, the sharing of insight, knowing others have moved out of trauma and have actually strengthened as a result of what they've learned and been able to give more to others as a result of that. I think the notion of trauma and triggering and being re-triggered is that these experiences are important for us to know about, but equally important, I believe, in terms of our healing process, is to know that others have made it through and that they've made it through with extraordinary depth of heart. And I think of someone like Malala, who got shot in the head for standing within her principles. And this could have been literally a life-crushing experience. And she came through it and sends her voice in the world. So in a way, she's a role model for me, and I think for many of us, of someone who had encountered extraordinary adversity, but somehow through her determination, found herself on the high edge of integrity and gathered us all in with her strength. So knowing about others who have made their way through the Scylla and Charybdis, the clashing stones of trauma, I think is really important. Otherwise, we're just in the narrative that this is a no exit situation. Yeah.
So we have a few questions about working with judgmental feelings towards others in this time. How to retrain your brain when you start to be judgmental of others.
Well, that's a great question. Actually, yeah. So I think that the judgment that we deploy in relation to others is probably equal to the judgment that we deploy against ourselves. And it's important to recognize our own self-criticism, and also how often that pattern of self-talk, that undermutter that is constantly skeptical, critiquing, putting down, is an element of the ego that wants to succeed and actually destroys. And I feel that the intentional cultivation of loving kindness, a practice I learned from my beloved friend, Sharon Salzberg, where you are actually instantiating a different narrative. And along with the narrative, a different somatic experience in relation to the narrative, that the cultivation of the Brahma Viharas, of loving kindness, of compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity toward others, toward those who are suffering, toward benefactors, toward our enemies, toward ourselves, because we are probably our worst enemy. These practices are salvational for many, and they begin to change, rewire, if you will, our neural networks toward compassion, toward kindness, toward much healthier pro-social qualities. So try it. 40 or 50 years ago, Sharon advocated that I try it. I have not been a perfect student of these practices, but they have really made an enormous difference in my life.
All right. Maybe we'll have 2 more questions. That sounds good. How can we give our presence wholeheartedly while communicating through a screen?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just learning it myself. But you know what I think? I think we can do this. This is a new medium for many of us, and also we're being, to kind of plunge into this medium. And I also want warm hand to warm hand. I'm glad I'm here with so many of my students and also colleagues. So I have the opportunity to have a warm hand to warm hand moment every day. But also I realize the value in this has been, at Upaya, we have the spring practice period, over 700 people are joining at various times. And it's been a really eye-opening experience for me, and it's been a heart-opening experience for me. I just feel, when I sit across from the woman in Pakistan and she's sharing her life with me, I feel it's my life too. So for me, I don't know for you, but it's a learned experience. And I'm finding myself moved by this Mahasangha online.
Yes, truly. It's a wonderful opportunity. So after the closure of this pandemic, what steps will be helpful to reconnect, to go forward as humans in a changed world?
So while that question was being asked, I'm looking for the poem that, there it is, that I want to share at the end.
Oh, great.
So forgive me.
That's all right.
I want you to ask me that question again.
Yes. After the closure of this pandemic, what steps will be helpful to reconnect, to go forward as humans in a changed world?
I don't know. But I have hope. I truly have hope. Our economic system is collapsing. Our environment in some ways has benefited from the lack of carbon in the air. Our capacity to meet each other in this sort of online platform, and to realize, as we hear again and again, we are all in this together, and we have been in this together forever. But now we're beginning to get it. And I think that is just incredible. We're in a phase shift. It is so radical. And I believe that it is an invitation to all of us, truly, to strengthen our love, to strengthen our courage, and also to cultivate a kind of compassion that is, I use the word ruthless, but I mean it. I mean that we are there with the kind of moral nerve that allows us to stand up in the midst of great catastrophe, great suffering. But in that process, to also know, as one of the phrases that we share with our caregivers, may I see my own limits with compassion, just as I view the suffering of others. Finding balance, not being at a toy of the corporate world, ceasing to consume relentlessly, and cherishing our relationships as we move into the future, and taking good care of our caregivers, of doctors, nurses, chaplains, social workers, of our educators, of producing a platform in politics that is compassion-based, not greed-based. So it takes a lot of moral nerve, but it takes also a lot of clarity to do this. And I think that this stepping back and turning the light around, as various great teachers have spoken about, gives us the opportunity to examine our lives deeply, to look at our priorities, and as we come out of this pandemic, to resolve and then to act with love that is principled and love that is compassionate.
Thank you so much. There are so many wonderful questions here. Maybe I'll just do one more if that's all right, and then we'll close out. Does that work? Or if you'd like to.
I do want to close out with this beautiful
okay.
poem.
Yes, well, we can do that then.
Well, either way, I'm good for another question,
right.
And I'm good for a poem.
All right, let's do one more and then we can close with the poem.
And thank you for these questions. They're so important. My answers are just fumbles, but the questions are bringing up a lot for me. So I'm very appreciative.
Thank you for your responses. So Joyce mentions that she was very moved by a talk you gave on wise hope in 2019. And these weeks, with many unwholesome actions from officials and the government, I find it very hard to keep the wise hope, but instead feeling pessimistic. What can we do to keep the wise hope going?
Well, I think our pessimism is part of the wise hope. In other words, in a funny way, optimism and pessimism say we don't have to act. And when we put that into the equation of hope, you realize, oh, that's not where it's at. Because hope is about probability and possibility. And that's what I feel. I think this is awful. But I remember the psychiatrist Dabrowski in the 1970s talked about positive disintegration, and we are in it. And maybe it's going to get worse before it gets better. But our job right now is to learn from what's going down, what has contributed to what's going down, including environmental destruction, our consumerism, which has driven the destruction of the environment, the greed narrative in our global society, and to learn from it and to shift out of it to a narrative that is based on cooperation and respect and generativity. And I think we are in a time that we're in the sort of hard part of birth. But we will hopefully, as they say, and if you're a Christian, Christ is risen, a resurrection might be possible from this catastrophe that has social, economic, racial, and spiritual implications that are extraordinary. And may it be so, and we have to be part of that and learn from what we're going through now. So I'd like to complete this session, if you don't mind, with a poem by another woman poet. Her name is Lynn Unger, and it's called Passover. And she begins with a quote from Exodus 12, verses 7 and 13. Then you shall take some of the blood and put it on the doorposts and the lintels of the houses. And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you, and no plague shall fall upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And then Lynn writes, they thought they were safe that spring night when they daubed the doorways with sacrificial blood. To be sure, the angel of death passed over them, but for what? 40 years in the desert, without a home, without a bed, following new laws to an unknown land. Easier to have died in Egypt or stayed there a slave, pretending there was safety in the old familiar. But the promise from those first naked days outside the garden is that there is no safety, only the terrible blessing of the journey. You were born through a doorway marked in blood. We are, all of us, passed over, rushed in the night by terrible wings. Ask that fierce presence whose imagination you hold. God did not promise that we shall live, but that we might at last glimpse the stars brilliant in the desert sky. Just to repeat a few lines. Easier to have died in Egypt or stayed there a slave. We are in a kind of Egypt as a slave, pretending there was safety in the old familiar. But the promise is that this is a terrible blessing of the journey. We were born through a doorway marked in blood. We are, all of us, passed over, brushed in the night by terrible wings. Ask that fierce presence whose imagination you hold. That fierce presence is you and me. God did not promise that we shall live, but that we might at last glimpse the stars brilliant in the night sky. Thank you, Lynn Unger. Thank you, everyone, for being with me today. Thank you, Tricycle.
Thank you so much to you, Roshi Joan, for sharing your practice with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us on this call and shared your questions. It really is a wonderful opportunity to connect in some way during this time. So just a few remarks. Our next session is this Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with Bishop Reverend Harada of the Shin Buddhist tradition. You can keep checking tricycle.org/live for upcoming session dates and to view the recordings of each session. And again, we are providing these sessions for free. So if you want to help support this and other efforts to connect during this time, please consider donating at tricycle.org/donate. Many thanks again to you, Roshi Joan, and may everyone be healthy and safe in this time.
Thank you.